I arrived home on a Wednesday night in January and found a water shutoff notice, an electric shutoff notice, and an eviction notice on my door. I remember taking them in my hands and walking inside where it was very cold and very dark. And I was overwhelmed by some pretty contradicting emotions. At one point, I felt really relieved because I had just dropped my daughter off with her father. She wasn't with me. I knew that she was warm. I knew that she was safe. I knew that she was cared for. And at the same time, I was terrified. I was at that point in my separation, almost divorced, where we'd come to some level of agreement about the division of our assets, and most importantly, what the custody of our daughter would look like from that point forward. But during that mediation time and figuring out this process, my soon-to-be ex-husband had a knack for instilling some level of fear and disbelief that I would be competent enough to care for our daughter as a single mom, and that I would be stable enough for her to be okay. And I was terrified that these 3 pieces of paper meant that his statements might be actually coming true. I spent a very cold, lonely night by myself, sitting in the middle of the floor, trying to figure out how I'd gone from where I was, wife, a mother, a homeowner, 3 dogs, 2 acres of property, a full-time student, full-time employee. I mean, the list went on to where I was in that very moment, a woman who had nothing. And I know I didn't sleep that night. I remember getting up off the floor as it was starting to get light outside and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I walked into the bathroom and it was very dark, and I remember staring at essentially my shadow in the mirror and remembering that in my house growing up, you never let them see you sweat. You put a smiley face on and you walked out the door and you didn't tell anybody what was going on behind closed doors, and you never asked for help. So I got as ready as I could without being able to take a shower and without being able to go through my morning routine, and I got into my car and I went to work, and I arrived relatively early, so I thought, okay, I'm not going to necessarily have to see anyone. I had an office that was very closed off, and no appointments on my calendar that day. So I closed the door, took a deep breath, felt like I had a moment of refuge where it was light and warm, but clearly didn't get much work done that day. I was hoping that no one would come in, but unfortunately, there was a knock on my door. I almost didn't answer it, but I chose to. And when the door opened, one of my colleagues who I'd been working with for a while and had become a friend over time came through the door and looked me in the eye and said, "Gretchen, what is going on?" And I remember looking back at Keisha and not wanting to say anything. I wanted to smile and let her know, oh, everything's fine, just a long night. But before I could stop myself, all of these words started pouring out of me, and I told her that the divorce was almost finalized and that, my family didn't want to talk to me, and these things that were going on were actually my fault, even though he was cheating on me, and I didn't have any water, I didn't have any light, and I was about to not have a roof over my head, and my daughter was coming home on Sunday, and I didn't even know what home was. So, I looked at her, and I half expected her to laugh and walk out the door and tell me she didn't know and good luck, and I held my breath. And she looked me in the eye and she said, "We got this. I know somebody who needs a housemate." And so by the time Sunday rolled around, with some quick work of some really great people, my daughter and I had a bed and a roof, and I remember laying down next to her, that night, listening to her sleep and just weeping with relief and with the appreciation that my community had become my family. It's interesting how life comes full circle. Currently, I'm actually working for Compass Housing Alliance. I am the program manager for their family housing, transitional housing program. So I'm working with families who are experiencing homelessness and trying to recover from that. So that's where my life has gotten me so far. Homelessness and housing instability is something that affects people and impacts people outside of the stereotypical norm. It can happen very quickly, and as cliche as it may be, it can happen to anybody. Circumstances change, and they're not always foreseeable. There are times where individuals are experiencing things and you would never know it. And so being aware and being connected to the people around you can be a really powerful experience on both sides.